Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the ever-expanding universe, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. In this video I'm going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's recent film, the adaptation of the ancient Greek epic poem, the Odyssey, attributed to Homer. And I'm going to be talking in this video about my own subjective experience of the film because that's what I focus on this channel. I like to talk about the themes of a work, and I like to talk about what I think is interesting about the work and how it read or to me or affected me. So I'm going to say right up the top that I wasn't the most sympathetic viewer of the Odyssey. I didn't initially really want to see it, but I was curious because it seemed to be a major cinematic event that people were speaking very highly of, and I didn't want to miss out on a kind of touchstone of culture. It's nice to feel like you're participating sometimes. And despite myself, I ended up admiring the film quite a bit. So I'm going to talk in this video about what my misgivings were, some of the things that for me personally didn't quite work for the film, but how it won me over despite that and the reasons I think that happened. Before I do that, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to talk briefly about my view of Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, just to contextualize what you will hear me saying in the rest of the video. I don't think there's any doubt that Christopher Nolan is a very ambitious and a very accomplished filmmaker. He definitely cares deeply about cinema, and in some ways you could argue that all his films are kind of really just about film, about what he can do with cinema, how he can play with visuals, with time, with editing, how he can piece together a narrative. And he always seems to want to say something significant about human experience, which I appreciate. Somehow it doesn't end up resonating with me usually. I end up often thinking that his films are fantastic as spectacle, or at least the ones that I like, but I often don't love them. And so I like Inception, for example. I really like Interstellar a great deal. I think that's among his best films. Maybe my favorite of his films was his second film, Memento, which was the first one I saw by him. And I think in that film, he had the perfect marriage of theme and technique, because he's very, very interested in time and memory. And Memento had the perfect concept to explore those themes, and the way that he pieced the work together made you feel like you yourself were forgetting the story of the film as it went on. So Memento, I think, is excellent, and his films have become greater in scope since then, but to me, maybe never quite as effective. And some of his films I really dislike, and a major example of that for me is The Dark Knight, the second Batman film that he made. To me, that film is all too serious for a superhero film. Why so serious? I know. It's formally terrible, I think. It's structurally bad. The third part of it, the third act, is way too long. It's unwieldy. It's messy philosophically. There's terrible like visual elements in it, like that part at the end with some kind of night screen fighting that was just like in the cinema an appalling visual and physical experience. And in addition to all of that, I can't stand the politics of The Dark Knight. The original comic book is quite evidently pro-fascist, and the film stops short of that. You could argue that any Batman adaptation will be pro-vigilante, but The Dark Knight, in the context of the time it came out, was also a kind of apologia for the American practice of extraordinary rendition, where America was breaking international law and basically abducting people and torturing them, which is interesting given the themes of the Odyssey, which is something I'll come back to. I think that the political position the Odyssey takes is far more interesting. One thing the Odyssey definitely has in its favour is that it has fantastic casting. Matt Damon in the lead role, playing very subtly, underplaying quite a lot. Anne Hathaway as his wife Penelope. And it has titans like Charlize Theron in quite minor roles doing excellent work. It has a lot of very big personalities, very big actors. And they are doing a great job in the film of playing an ensemble. Nobody is trying to steal the scene or steal the film. There are also great supporting roles from character actors like John Leguizamo, who is great to see again. Remember how fantastic he was back in the day in Romeo and Juliet. Himesh Patel does a fantastic performance, and Samantha Morton also as Cersei really steals that part of the film, but again, not by overplaying, just by doing exactly what she needs to do. So I really talked in the introduction about some things that made me skeptical about seeing this film, how I feel about The Dark Knight and how I feel about Nolan generally as a filmmaker. And then something that in the beginning of this film made it difficult for me to really relax into or feel that I was going to enjoy is the decisions that were made around the aesthetics of the film. This is a Greek mythological epic poem with supernatural creatures, mythical creatures, a world where the gods can walk among humans. And Nolan has made a decision to make this film as close to Western realism as a genre as possible. That's one thing, so this is not like Jason and the Argonauts that was super colourful and almost camp. This is very serious, it's very realistic as much as it can be. So when the mythical creatures come into it, they seem to be coming into, the world that we recognize. But additionally, and this is something that Nolan has done earlier, but I think it's extreme in this film, he sapped the palette of color. So even red, the color red is close to grey. Everything's kind of blues and greys and washed out as hell. And I don't really understand that. And maybe it's because I'm really into Hindi cinema at the moment and Indian cinema, and that's often very vibrant. But it's like kind of a shorthand for being serious, for being grand, and it just ends up being kind of literally colorless. There are some times when this combination of color and the attempt at realism just does not work for me. I didn't like the way the Cyclops was presented. I didn't like this kind of attempt to make it real that to me made it seem less real. It seemed less convincing. It seemed less scary. The many-headed monster, I think it's pronounced as Scylla, that they meet in the ocean, which was digitally rendered. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was terrible, really bad. And the landscapes, they really don't take advantage of the seascapes and the landscapes, in my opinion, because everything's sort of flattened out in this washed out color. So I really don't like the aesthetics of the film. However, at times they do work, and these are often when the film is closer to horror. So, for example, Samantha Morton's Cersei, when she is turning Odysseus's men into pigs, the way that's rendered, it's very close to a scene from a horror film. She's kind of stretching them and moving them, and it's almost like it's like practical effects. It looks like reminiscent of something from a werewolf film, or a witch film. And the way Nolan has used kind of blocking as well to like obscure the bodies, and then you see some movement. It's really quite disturbing, and that works really well. It's very, very physical. I also think that the scene when they sail to the edge of Oceanus and they meet the dead, and they meet his dead crew, and that whole sequence, that kind of dark, colorless style, so super like hyper clear but dark, works very well for that scene. But in the overall scope of the film, it meant that I maybe couldn't really love it the way I would like to. So I think though that the screenplay is really good, and Nolan has written it. I know that people have criticized the dialogue. It's not poetic. There's not really a poetic register. In fact, they're using very colloquial language a lot of the time and very contemporary language. But it's translated into English and everybody's speaking with an American accent, despite the fact it's an international cast. And it's done, I think, to try to make the language and the dialogue sort of invisible, to make it seem in the same way as he's gone for a kind of realist style. They want it to come as close to you as possible. So the fact that people are saying dad and where you're going and what you're doing, it doesn't bug me at all. But what I mean by the fact that it's well written is that the pacing and the structure of the narrative, to my mind, is fantastic. And Nolan is playing again with time and with narrative threads and with flashbacks, but in a way that's, to me, very unintrusive and builds the themes together into the narrative extremely well. Even in a 3 hour movie, you can't adapt all of the incidents from the Odyssey, and Nolan has made quite careful decisions about what he's changed and what he's removed. He's created a world where the gods intercede and intervene less often, and in that way he's brought the film closer to contemporary questions of faith. The politics of this film are quite conservative, and that's to be expected, and I think that it's not unfair given the source material. This is a story about a great man and about him ruling over others, about him being a leader, about what it takes to be a leader. It's about returning from war. It's about a royal family. It's about the forces of order and the forces of chaos and a tension between the two. It's about a culture on the brink of collapse. But it's conservative in a very different way than Batman, and in a way that I found moving despite myself. What I think is quite a beautiful interpretation of the story that Nolan has put on this film is that Odysseus could not return home because of what he saw and what he did at Troy. What he did at Troy with the Trojan horse was a war crime. Circe, the witch on the island, knew what the men had done at Troy, knew what they'd done to the women at Troy, and she knew that they were pigs, and that's why she transformed them. And the idea of this version of the story is that something is broken in Odysseus because of what he's done and what he's seen. And so home no longer exists. He can never return home. So it's the story of a soldier who cannot return home. There's also a sense, and this appeals to me again with my current interest in Hindi cinema, there's a sense that the natural order, the cosmic order, has been violated. Zeus's law has been broken. They made a peace offering that was an act of aggression, and this has unsettled the cosmic order, and Odysseus knows that this will have consequences also at home. I talked on this channel recently about the concept of the imperial boomerang, the concept that what the empire does abroad, what it does in its colonies, what it does internationally, it will eventually do at home. And this is a film about how Odysseus cannot escape what he has done in Troy. It has reverberations for the entire world, including his idealized home of Ithaca. In its final moments, the film is explicitly about the collapse of empire. Odysseus says to Penelope that in the future they will sing of us because that's the only way they will remember we who could write. He's talking about how the Greek civilization will come to an end, and he predicts that in the future there will be a new civilization that will rise up. And in this, Nolan is talking about the Western civilization and implicitly America as part of this. And he's saying in no uncertain terms, I think, that the feeling we may have that the West is in a state of collapse is the result of the crimes of the West, the crimes of empire. So that is my take on the Odyssey. If you've seen the movie or if you've read the poem, jump in the comments, let me know what you thought of my ideas. I was very selective in what I talked about. I could have talked about Travis Scott. I love that he was in the film. I could have talked about a whole host of the other supporting actors. I could have talked about how much I actually really liked the bit about Calypso. There was loads of things I could have talked about. So let's continue the conversation in the comments if you feel so inclined. If not, thank you for listening to me. Click a like if you wouldn't mind. It always helps people see my videos, and take care for now.